The mobile workforce, including those working in challenging or hazardous business environments, frequently use consumer mobile devices with a bespoke app or two inside a supposedly rugged case. This webinar will discuss how industries using mobile devices in challenging work environments are counting the cost of using the wrong kit. We'll also explore how best to go about selecting devices for your organisation and learn from those who are getting it right. To help tackle this, we're joined by James Summers, founder and CEO of Conker, Brett Cooper, Senior Geotechnical Software Specialist at Fugro, and Andrew Hobbs, Research Analyst, Enterprise Technology at Incisive Media. I'm computing news editor Graham Burton, and I'll be your host. Before we begin, I'd like to urge you, the audience, to put your questions to our panel. They will come direct to me in the studio, and I'll put them straight to our experts. We'll also have 2 polls for you that we'll be putting to you during this webinar. For poll number 1, we're asking, most mobile devices are either not rugged enough or over-spec'd and cumbersome. Please answer on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree. We'll bring you the results of this poll later in the webinar. James, what are your thoughts on choosing for-purpose mobile devices?
Well, I think the fit for purpose is something that's very individual for users and organisations, and we have to give credit to a few different elements. What really drives me, and something that I think would drive much of your audience, is this focus on boosting productivity. But also what we're really fanatical about looking at is making things easier for mobile users in order to achieve fit for purpose. So it really means about deeply understanding the purpose of their work and the function that the devices in turn serve, because the device is always operating in service to the user, and that user has a job to do, and that's what we need to understand to get to fit for purpose. So we already know that mobile devices aren't like desktop PCs, they're not bought like desktop PCs, they're not just a commodity, and they're not even really about just access to information. What they've become is this indispensable part of that user's toolkit in the field. And we know that because when the devices fail, and they do, or even when the device gets damaged, that user can no longer do their job. And the user doesn't always necessarily realise this, but what organisations are saying to us is that the cost in lost service is immediately greater to them than the original cost of the device. It's just a hidden cost. It's hidden on the P&L as an operating expense, and it's disconnected from that original capital planning. So what I'm most interested in discovering today is what people's answers reveal about the purpose of their work, and also sort of in digging into this idea of fit for purpose to see if the audience's answers, if they tell this story that the service value of their work is greater than the monetary value of their devices.
So in some ways it's about reducing failures, but it's also about failing more nicely, failing more obviously, so you can do something about it before it becomes a productivity issue.
I think it's about being pragmatic and planning for failure rather than saying that we're going to avoid that.
Okay, Andrew, I believe you have some research for us.
I do indeed. So to kick things off, we asked our audience of endpoint device decision makers with a need for durable mobile devices, what types of mobile devices, such as tablets and smartphones, does your organisation use? And despite limiting the research to organisations with a need for durable or rugged enterprise devices, just 21% are using these devices. Meanwhile, over a third are using consumer devices without a case. 60% are using consumer devices in a standard case, and 42% consumer devices in a rugged case. And obviously many will be using a combination of these as well. This in itself isn't necessarily a problem, but when we asked, have you experienced consumer mobile device reliability or durability issues to the extent that it is a cost and productivity problem for your organisation, 60% said yes it is. So this clearly indicates that many are specifying the wrong devices for the job. And this is unsurprising when you ask which of the following working conditions do your mobile devices have to withstand. 69% are having to withstand rough handling and drops. Poor network Wi-Fi signal, that's kind of a bit an aside here, but that's clearly an important issue as well. And then over a third are having to withstand sand, dust, and other particles, perhaps on construction sites, places like that. So clearly, there's some serious environmental conditions that these devices have to withstand, and perhaps a consumer device isn't fit in this case.
James, what's wrong with wrapping up consumer devices in thick rubber or a plastic case?
Sure. Well, fundamentally, the issue with putting shoulder pads on something is that it doesn't stop you getting smacked in the face. And shoulder pads look good. You know, we get the idea, and sure, that is part of protecting a device. But there is a lot more that you want to protect, and the working conditions that people are discussing there, even the connectivity issue that seems like it's a little on a tangent, you know, organizations demand all of that. Putting shoulder pads on a device won't generally protect from liquids, won't generally protect from bright light, won't generally protect from extreme temperatures, both high and low, something that batteries in regular devices don't like. So ruggedization is about much more than just that tough look, just those shoulder pads, as it were.
Is there much choice of rugged enterprise devices out there, Brett?
Oh, there certainly are, yes. Most of the main computer manufacturers have a rugged device in their lineup, and a quick internet search will reveal you lots of different rugged devices that are available. You just have to be mindful that not all rugged devices are equal, and you really do need to think about your end use when you're thinking about what device that you actually want to purchase.
Just to drill down on the hardware bit, is it a case that rugged devices are, for the price, they're under-spec'd and they've basically got a lot of rubber attached to them, or is there a bit more to most of the rugged devices out there at the moment?
Yeah, it's certainly more than just having a rugged bumper on your device. From the research there, you can see that people are highlighting that it's rough handling, it's the drops, it's using devices outside in the rain, so moisture is always a problem, and using devices out in bright light. And these are all things that a normal consumer device is not necessarily suited to.
So even if you've got a service partner and they're offering you rugged device, use these are great, they're good rugged devices. You've got to ask questions about the IP certification and things like that.
So certainly, you have to be very clear on what your end use is, and then come up with what spec of device you need for that end use, and try not to just specify a rugged device and just buying anything.
Yeah. Presumably also, if it's a big rollout, you should be advised to get hold of a few devices and punish them in the kind of environment that they're going to be used in.
Certainly, if you're going to purchase a number of devices, then approach the suppliers early, and most suppliers are more than happy to work with you and give you demo devices. Get your hands on them, take them out to where you're actually going to use them, and test them properly.
There's also standard industry data out there for failure rates, and obviously everything will vary for that, and so users can ask those questions. I think failure rates in year one for consumer devices when they're used in a context where a rugged device would have been suitable is about 18%, and over 3 years it's almost 100%. And so our focus is actually on measuring uptime, because that's what we think people are really buying. And our figure for that is around 96%. It's what people should be focusing on over 3 years.
That 100% failure rate is not people smashing them kind of on purpose because they want a new one.
Well, interestingly, the failure rates grow exponentially. So most of those failures happen in year 3.
Oh, okay, interesting.
As devices are older, as drops are compounding, and as issues are growing.
Now you have some insight into what some major organisations like Balfour Beatty and Tata Steel have done with ruggedised mobile devices. Can you tell us a bit more about those projects and what they did and what was learnt from them?
Yeah, what we find with larger organisations really is that they have a broader view of their IT estate. I think they go in with a much broader plan of how they're going to achieve uptime, and I think they have a greater recognition up front of the value of their time as well. And so they plan very broadly, not just in terms of serviceability and the duration that the devices will be out, and for some of those companies it's 5 years, but they also plan about the uptime in terms of other levels, in terms of mobile device management software, service plans with their provider, and they just take that broader view of the device lifetime.
Now I've got a question from the audience, someone called John, who I suspect you've partly answered this already, but I'll throw it to you anyway. Do ruggedized devices have a longer expected lifetime? If so, isn't there a problem with components, operating systems, updates and so on going out of date, and hence the device becoming insecure?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, most organizations want continuity and actually don't want things to change. So if they're having, some customers, particularly industries like, say, for example, rail, will have very long contracts that they're aware of the duration of those contracts up front. They don't really want things to change. So we've got people out there using very old versions of systems because actually that's what they want. They want to put the same thing in place year after year as they're putting more devices out there. But to answer the question about devices failing, absolutely, rugged devices do last longer, and I think that Brett will I'm sure be able to attest to that in his own experience.
Because you've used a few different devices, so
certainly we do have a number of device manufacturers, and we're using their rugged devices in all sorts of environments. I think keeping operating systems and apps up to date is pretty standard good practice, really. As far as the hardware itself goes, I expect a 3 to 5 year lifespan, and I would hope not to be experiencing any problems. Certainly less than 3 years.
Now, particularly in the Android ecosystem, updates is a bit of an issue. Do you find that the manufacturers of ruggedized devices are better at providing you with the patches, with the updates and so on?
I think it's pretty consistent, really. I think for most business users, they're probably using the Windows environment, and management of updates and things like that's probably a lot easier for them.
I know from an earlier conversation that Brett's devices are principally Windows based. We see both sides of the coin. And the way that people are tackling that fragmentation issue with Android is just to sandbox the device. And so there's now a very big focus on endpoint management, mobile device management, because the devices are being used almost as a single purpose tool. Access to the wider operating system is not only, is actually undesirable. So really it's about locking in just the function that device is going to provide. And so the operating system version becomes a little less important, because I don't think that people have got faith, particularly on the Android side, in Google or the device manufacturer providing updates or actually providing a secure environment for them.
I've got a cheeky little question here from Tristan. It's a very cheeky question, you'll love it. He says, new iPhones are rated to IP69. Conker offer products up to IP67. What additional features does Conker offer?
It's really about serviceability, and the interesting thing about consumer devices and the growth in IP protection in consumer devices is just the amount of stories where people tell me about their wife dropping it in the toilet and proving that the IP protection isn't there. Because what happens when you drop a device is that actually you start to wear down seals. A couple of devices drops in the house, a couple of drops in the street, and then suddenly it gets wet and you wonder why that ingress protection that you were sold on is no longer there. So I think there's a bit of marketing there. I think the consumer space and what's happening with IP protection is good overall for the industry, because it's educating people about IP protection. What we need to be able to do is drop a device for 3 years and still carry an IP protection.
I see. Okay. Okay. Andrew, I believe you've got a little bit more research for us.
I do indeed.
Excellent.
So we asked, what are your organisation's main motivations behind using mobile devices? We asked participants to select 3 maximum, so although some of those further down may be of interest to participants, we're trying to get a handle on what the main motivations are. And unsurprisingly, productivity gains has come out on top at just under half. And that's obviously linked with connectivity and communication. And perhaps the other side of this productivity coin is improved working environment. I think the motivations behind using mobile devices are well established by now, so I probably don't need to talk too much about that. But I think what's interesting here is when a mobile device goes down, you're losing all these advantages. You're losing those productivity gains, the ability to collect data, and so on. So I think that's something to certainly bear in mind here. Moving on, we asked how important are the following when selecting a device vendor or partner, and we can see that across the board all of these elements are important. So it goes to show that it's not just about the device at the end of the day. It's the customer support, it's the transparency of costs. So maybe the upfront cost might be higher, but in the enterprise space, you're really looking at the cost over the lifetime of the device. Overall cost, unsurprisingly, perhaps has come out on top. That's obviously it's business at the end of the day, but equally you want that vendor to be easy to work with. You want that support level to be there. And just to emphasise how important all of these are, being based in the UK fell towards the bottom of the chart, but that was still ranked as important or extremely important by 58% of those surveyed.
Okay, before we discuss that, I just want to say we're going to be closing the results of poll 1 right now, and after the discussion we'll bring you the results of that as well as introducing you to poll number 2. Cost is right up there. Fugro, is cost right up there, pretty much at the top for you?
It certainly is, yeah. Right or wrong, when you're investing in hardware and in technology, we have to be able to put together a business case, so we need to be upfront about the costs.
Okay, so cost is pretty much number one. It's nothing happens without it.
Somewhere, I think for most people in most businesses, they will have a line manager, a director, a financial officer, somebody that they need to be able to pass a bottom line figure of how much we need to invest in this technology, and that needs to be signed off, and unfortunately that's the case in most business.
What's interesting is actually you phrased it as overall cost rather than upfront cost. So actually you're implying in that the broadest possible costs for a project. But actually the cost is really, it's a business objective. Everything else on there is perhaps a result of that. And I can see many of those things are going to fold directly into cost. So of course cost is going to be elevated, but all of those could represent a cost element.
Cost transparency is also their joint third, I suppose you could say. And by cost transparency, I presume that's wanting to know what it's going to cost, not just in year 1, but year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and having an insight into how much it should cost.
Yeah, I mean, if that's your reading, it's really interesting to see that, because I'm not sure that the industry offers much cost transparency. And I suppose obviously you've put the answer on the list, and so people have ticked it, and perhaps that's indicating that there's not much cost transparency in the industry. That's great. People should be pushing for the answers to those questions, absolutely.
Just to roll back a bit, I mean, before you were talking about the failure rates of consumer devices, which go all the way up to around about 100% on year 3. How does that compare with ruggedized devices?
Yeah, so this is industry data from an industry research body called VDC. So it's not our research, and it is independent research, and that's quite easy to look up online. And yeah, they saw that over 3 years, it's pretty much something around 98% for consumer devices. With rugged, it varies greatly, and so ask your supplier what their figures are. But their research, with data fed back from manufacturers, was about 3% in the first year, a little more in year 2, and then it jumps to about 18% in year 3, and that's compounding. So you do get this big surge in year 3 of failure with consumer and with rugged devices, but it's still very much lower.
I see. Is 3 years a typical cycle, or do you recommend 5 years?
3 years is the bare minimum way that a business looks at its IT costs. It'd be interesting to hear what Brett applies. We see an average of about 4 with our customers. There are many people applying 5. Brett, what?
For us, we're certainly looking no less than 3 years. Certainly average 4, but we would like to see a 5-year life cycle for our devices.
And what everybody knows with any device is that batteries become an issue after just 18 months, sometimes maybe out to 2 years, is that people will need to replace batteries. So even if a device is perfectly functioning, there's still a serviceability element that needs to be considered, particularly if you're pushing out to 5 years. No battery is going to be performing at its optimum after 3.
Yes, certainly I would suggest easily within 2 years you're certainly going to be looking at not getting optimum performance from batteries. So it's certainly a cost easy to overlook, but something that you definitely need to be thinking about.
Is that something that you can easily do, or more easily do, with a ruggedized device than with a nice shiny glass? And
most rugged devices are engineered such that batteries are easily swappable.
Okay, another question here from Tristan. I suspect we've partly answered it, but I'll put it to the panel anyway. Often we need to extend battery life. How do aftermarket accessories like battery packs affect cases' integrity?
Yeah, it's very much device specific. Historically, rugged devices have usually had user replaceable batteries, but that function of the device is added to the overall bulk of the device. And I think where there's this real push for the device to be ever smaller and ever more portable, even with rugged, which is always going to be that little bit larger than consumer devices, we're now offering, and other people in the market are offering, devices that don't have user replaceable batteries. And that's going to come down to the individual choice as to how you handle that. What's still critical though is that device isn't sealed, isn't glued together, so it comes down to the serviceability of the device. And again, it's exploring that cost transparency. What is going to be the cost of replacing a device? And you can basically secure those costs on day one and have battery swap outs, say at a 2-month junction, at a 2-year junction, or whatever junction you think will work for the business.
And when organisations need to swap out batteries, do they need to send it off to a service centre in, I don't know, Slovakia or somewhere, or is it something that their own IT department can do?
Again, it's another cost element that should be understood. If it's a user swappable battery, then a battery could be sent out. I think perhaps with some of the devices that Brett has, we could supply devices, and the IT department would be the first line for that solution. Is that right?
Yeah, for me, a user swappable battery is probably up there on the really important list. We may even want to be able to swap batteries in routine use. If you're working in the field, extended shifts, 24-hour shifts, if we're working offshore, then we may need to hot swap batteries just in normal use. So a user swappable battery is really important for us.
So it's really about know your environment and to consider these things first of all when you're buying the devices.
It answers that fit for purpose question again, doesn't it? What is the purpose of the work? But not to hide the fact that there are devices that we sell that don't have user swappable devices, swappable batteries. Some do, and you mentioned about sending it off to Slovakia, and that's where the based in the UK figure comes in. Where is that device going to go for repair, and what is the time of that? Ask those questions.
If anyone other than Tristan and John have questions, please do send them to me. They come straight through here, and I'll put them to our panel as soon as I can. In terms of motivations, connectivity actually scored extremely highly. I'm wondering, does a ruggedized device answer that need? Does it have better quality Wi-Fi or 4G connectivity?
I think that pulls out what I was saying at the beginning. It pulls out something about people answering the survey are telling us about the purpose of their work. So it's not about the cost of the device. It's about what they're doing with it, and connectivity is incredibly important. All our devices, all devices now have connectivity there. Very, most commonly Wi-Fi. Quite often people are adding 4G as well. And it's just about having that permanent uptime of communication between the device and the office, that flow of information. What's important is that isn't interrupted. Now sometimes a device might just have poorer Wi-Fi signal, so obviously a business wants to ensure that their device is absolutely tip-top, because they've experienced devices that maybe don't meet their requirements. But ultimately it's about maintaining that connectivity. I think that's what the answers are telling us.
What have you found in the field in terms of connectivity?
Yeah, for us, there's been a big shift in digitising all of our workflows. So having our workforce that are remote from our offices actually connected is really important for us. And being able to transfer data between our work sites in our offices and our clients as fast as we can is really important.
You're using a combination of Wi-Fi and presumably 4G in your fleet of devices?
Yeah, certainly Wi-Fi would be our preferred solution where we can, but yeah, as a minimum a 3G, 4G or 5G SIM card in your device, and you're going to get the maximum connectivity that you can achieve.
Okay, you have a variety of different manufacturers' devices, don't you?
We do. We're at the moment we're using devices from Conker, from Dell, and from Lenovo. They're all slightly different. You know, some have their pluses, some have their minuses, but I think we've got a good experience generally using Rugged devices.
Well, first of all, with regard to the connectivity question, are some of those devices better or worse than others? You can tell me, no one else will know.
Yes, but we'll name no names.
Name no names. Okay, so what do people need to consider or to look out for if connectivity really is a big issue?
I think the key thing there is to speak to your suppliers, get hold of a device and actually test it.
Right.
And a real world test, not just taking it and standing outside your office and testing it. Actually take it to the workplace and carry out the operation or the work task that you're actually going to perform on that device. Actually go out and do it.
Take it to the offshore North Sea oil platform and test it from there.
Yes, take it up the Scottish mountain, take it into central London and actually test them.
You mentioned, more broadly speaking, you mentioned the devices have their pluses and minuses. What pluses have you found and what minuses have you found?
I think certainly on batteries, there's a range of solutions where some manufacturers like to seal their batteries in their units to ensure that they're resistant to moisture. But then, you know, for us, if we're working long shifts and we need to be able to swap batteries, then that's not so good for us. So we need a device where I can flip the device over, flip a little catch, pop batteries out and pop them back in. It really comes down to what your end use is.
Do you find the consumer-based ruggedized devices are often, you know, they're good, but they lack some of these kind of features that you really need? Yeah.
I think if you go for more of the more consumer end of the market with maybe a rugged case, we've seen from the research so far that drops is important. One thing that isn't mentioned on there, certainly important for us, is these devices are used out on work sites and people are using other tools. So actually dropping objects onto device is something that certainly we've experienced in day-to-day use, and that's the sort of thing that if you drop something onto your consumer phone, then yeah, you've pretty much had it.
Going back to this battery issue, when it comes to consumer devices, I don't think vendors they're not too worried about the 18-month battery point where it starts to degrade. They're almost designed to deprecate in that way so that users upgrade, and I think they're more than willing to upgrade every couple of years. But you know, as we've said, that's just not what you want in the enterprise space. You want 3 to 5 years.
No, you know, consumer devices, you're probably replacing your phones every 12 months. Battery usage really isn't going to be a problem on a consumer device. When you're using rugged devices for the next 5 years, then battery is certainly going to be important.
Now, what kind of support is actually required? I mean, obviously you mentioned you need to flip out batteries sometimes and a few other particular needs, but what actual support do you need from a third party or to provide to your end users?
I think for day-to-day usage, I think most businesses will have their IT departments and their IT support people that will support users on a day-to-day basis. I think there's 2 key areas where you may want to think about your third-party support. The first is right up front. when you're thinking about using rugged devices, then if you can get some early engagement with a supplier or a manufacturer and actually get them to talk you through what's available and the sorts of solutions that they have. And that's probably going to help you control costs and have a good idea and have a good solution when you actually come to purchase and deploy them. And then, of course, when we're using devices, we hope that we will never require support. We would like a trouble-free 5-year usage, but we need to know that there's support there, that if we do experience a problem and we do experience a failure, we need to purchase batteries quickly, then that backup needs to be there.
Have you ever had a problem getting hold of important parts for an existing fleet of devices?
Depends a little bit on the geographical location of your supplier. I think if you're in the UK and you go with a UK-based supplier, then I think support and replacement hardware is easier to come by. Maybe if you're going to use one of the larger, maybe global manufacturers who may be based over in the United States, for me to get a replacement device from them is obviously going to take me longer.
Yes.
You've had direct experience, Brett, with you say Dell and Lenovo devices, and it will often give people peace of mind to buy from such a large global names. And with their rugged devices, how have you found their responsiveness? Are they available in the UK?
Certainly for Dell, so a US-based company. Yes, they have a very good support system in place. But just because of location, then if they need to ship devices or ship hardware to me, then it's clearly going to take longer. Also, we find that sometimes lead times on obtaining hardware are significantly longer when you're using maybe a manufacturer that's more a consumer but has a rugged device in their lineup, compared to maybe a more specialized supplier of rugged devices where they're geared up to actually support their devices straight away.
Because a local supplier will also presumably have legal requirements about keeping certain amounts of parts, whereas if they're, I don't know, located in Shenzhen, somewhere in China or whatever, they might not keep parts that you need because they have no legal compulsion to do so.
Well, yeah, it may be parts or hardware that they maybe don't supply in sufficient quantities to require them to keep stock in certain geographical areas.
Conker's view on this is straightforward. We're not in the box shipping business, we're in the uptime business. We hold more parts value than we do stock. That immediacy of availability for support, for parts, for repair, that whole service element, that's actually more important than getting the box out in the first instance.
What other elements of support are therefore required or needed by people you talk to?
It's very broad depending on the user. Brett's not untypical in that they have their own first level of IT support, so that's very typical that people want to handle first level support issues directly themselves, and we're coming in at the second level. For some organisations we're handling first level as well, in which case being able to get straight through to a human and not having to go through a complicated menu system or have any complication in getting hold of support is very, very important. After that, again, it depends on the devices that are out there, but people are looking for devices to be repaired, not replaced. And the time that a device is out of service is critical, particularly as you have larger device deployments, because every device that's out of service, even if you've replaced it on the spot with another unit from a buffer stock, which again is very typical of larger organizations, that becomes complicated as your deployment scales up, because if a device is out for a month, how many devices are out at any one time? It grows exponentially.
Okay, we promised you 2 polls, so I'd like to bring you the results of our first poll now. We asked, and if I just press this button here, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree, to what extent do you agree with the statement most mobile devices are either not rugged enough or over-spec'd and cumbersome? And you said, it's a bit annoying, really. It comes around at 3, which is right in the middle, which is 55% of users. So it's kind of like, let me pass this around so you can comment on it. That's what we're looking at there. It's an overwhelming victory for the I don't really have a strong opinion either way party.
Yeah, very much in the middle. So 1 being, where's the question?
One is strongly disagree. So I think basically it's kind of looking at, you have to agree that there are both devices that are either under-spec'd in an enterprise environment or over-spec'd, so you're talking military hardware. And perhaps that was more the case a few years ago, and now you've got more devices in this middle ground to choose from.
It's obvious that people are using a lot of different devices. So from one of the first surveys that you put on the screen, it was obvious, because it added up to more than 100%, that people were using rugged devices, consumer devices, devices in a standard case, devices in a rugged case. People have got exposure to a lot of devices. So yeah, I guess it makes sense that they know how to choose a device, and so the answers to that sort of put them in the middle, really.
Yeah.
Okay, do please keep your questions coming in the remaining time that we have. I'd like to open poll number 2 now, which we'll be discussing later. Poll number 2, we're asking whether you agree with the following statement: consumer mobile devices aren't suitable for demanding environmental conditions. Again, please give us a number from 1 to 5, where 1 is strongly disagree and 5 is strongly agree. Now, Andrew, unless I'm very much mistaken, you've got even more research for us.
I do. So we've got a couple of statements now that really just reinforce the findings we've seen so far. First up, we asked, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree, to what extent do you agree with the following statements? First up, we said the short life cycle of consumer devices makes them more expensive in the long run. And we've talked a bit about this already, but you can see here that it's very strongly weighted to the agree side, and I think it's clear from that that many people have been stung in the past by specifying consumer devices and then having issues with reliability down the line. Just 15% disagree with the statement, and 62% are either agreeing or strongly agreeing, so that's pretty conclusive. Moving on, the second statement was the quality of support and consulting provided by a mobile device partner are as important as the device itself. Again, we've talked about how it's not just about the device. Again, it's pretty strong. More in the middle ground there. Perhaps they don't have some of the support issues that Brett has here, but still 32% agreeing, 25% strongly agreeing. So I think peace of mind is key when it comes to enterprise mobile devices.
Okay. James, now perhaps I should have started first of all with this one. What is it that makes a ruggedized mobile device a ruggedized device? What do you need to do?
There are a lot of layers, I think, to what makes a rugged device, and for us it really goes beyond what you're seeing on the outside. Absolutely, the device internally is built from the ground up as rugged because it needs to withstand the rigors of high-low temperature, vibration, and not just the external knocks that it's going to receive. But also from our perspective, it comes to serviceability. People want these devices to be out in the field for a long time. The cost of replacement is very, very high. So serviceability and building a device for serviceability is key as well. Sometimes that's as simple as using screws rather than using glue, which would be the way that a consumer device is built. And then the layers of service that come around that. So we talk about rugged being a service to users rather than just being the product. So it is multi-layered beyond just the product. But of course, there's layers in there of rubber and protection, the visible things, they're there as well.
The respondents to our research seem to agree that consumer devices' short life cycle, I should say, not lifestyle, is a problem. Is that solely down to their tendency to break somewhat easily, or are there other issues involved?
No, I think continuity is massive for businesses, and they and actually our experience, or what organisations seem to show, is that they discover that themselves, but they have to discover it. It's very easy to say, well, you know that phone gets discontinued after a year, and then another phone, replaces it. We know that, but actually a business only discovers how big a problem that is once they've encountered it, because what they don't really want, user training is one reason, accessories, integrations into vehicles, into other peripherals that they use around the device. You don't want a fragmented estate of devices. Now, if you're using a consumer product, you could end up with 5 different models over 5 years. That's a mess. And IT don't want to manage that kind of mess. So devices being superseded, I think, is a bigger issue around the continuity than it is just around the failure of them.
So you want to know that all those workers on that offshore facility there all have pretty much the same device. You don't want to have to think about, okay, they've got that update, you've got that update, and so on.
Yeah, we invest a lot of time in actually rolling these devices out. It's not a case of just buying a device and sending it out to your users in the field. You need to configure them for your business use, and you'll need to put your business apps and things like that on them. And it takes a lot of time. And as James has mentioned, when we're using devices in vehicles and we need the vehicle fitments and the adapters and all the accessories that go with these devices, I don't want to be changing this every 12 months.
And what other negative experiences have you both had personally or had with clients in terms of their devices, their ruggedized devices, and particularly consumer devices?
On the consumer device side, the issue fundamentally is high failure rates and then issues with service costs. And just losing access to data is another big thing that people don't consider. Data is absolutely holy to organisations. When the device goes down, where is that data? Because if it wasn't immediately sent back to the office and it's still on a device, and a device is now beyond economical repair, getting access to that data is perhaps impossible. Certainly if it's an embedded product such as an Android or an iOS smartphone. So loss of data is a huge issue with consumer devices as well.
And also things, presumably, if someone's taking orders in the field or doing stuff in the field, rollback if there's a failure anywhere along the line is also important, so that you don't have a discontinuity, a difference between what's on the device and what's on your back-end database servers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's perhaps more a question for IT and systems and software that's running on devices, and a lot of people are running transactional systems. But it's not always that way. Brett works in remote locations. I'm sure that as much as they might want that information to be sent directly back, it can't always be done that way. Different, say, in a restaurant, sending an order through to the kitchen to working on an oil rig.
Yeah.
We mentioned support and consulting in that final piece of research. What do organisations need when rolling out fleets of mobile devices in terms of support and consulting?
I think they need help with understanding that fit-for-purpose piece. Organisations come to us rightly with a concern about cost, and rightly with a motivation to boost productivity. And those answers have screamed through in the data, in the answers to the surveys posted today. But people still need help with that fit-for-purpose piece. And really sort of calls out to what Brett is saying about testing devices. It's not just a case of choosing a commodity like you perhaps do a desktop PC. That device has got to go out in the field. You've got to start with one. And it's got to be in the hands of your users, because if there isn't user acceptance, then the project fails. You might spec a device, a 7-inch that's on the desk here, and the user says, but I can't see the information, or conversely, that it's too big, I need it to fit in my pocket. That real-world testing's got to be done.
I certainly can't stress enough how important fit for use is. And you really need to invest some time early on doing some research, testing devices. There's really no value in over-speccing a device. Sitting down and thinking, I need a rugged device, I'll just buy the most rugged device that I can find. Because again, linking back to the costs, you're just pushing your costs up and you're not really gaining anything from it. So for me, we spent a good 6 months researching, looking at our processes, making sure we knew what we needed our devices to do, and then actually getting our hands on with a few different devices and properly testing them and having them for 2 or 3 weeks and taking and working with them for 2 or 3 weeks. And that's really going to help you drill down and finding that sweet spot and finding that fit for purpose device.
I see. Okay, before we bring you our second poll, I want to ask you to finish voting. I've got a final question that I want to put to our panel, and that last question is, when will we see ruggedized folding devices?
Interesting timing, because of course that device has just hit the market. Brett, is there a need?
Nice big screen real estate.
Yeah. It's certainly not high on my list of requirements, but if a manufacturer can bring me a truly rugged foldable device, I'm fully prepared to take that out to the field and test it. I think I know what's going to happen.
Take it to the Sahara Desert and see how it goes.
It comes back to that functionality piece and answering fit for purpose. Does a business need that, or is it just a gimmick? But time will tell.
Yeah, I think I saw a video on YouTube recently trying out the revised version. They put some grit on the screen and folded it in half, and as he opened it again, you could hear it crunching in the complex gears within the folding mechanism already. So I think it will be a few years at least before we see it in the enterprise space.
Okay, right. Well, I'm just going to see if I can bring you the very final poll. We asked, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree, to what extent do you agree with the statement consumer devices aren't suitable for demanding environmental conditions? And if I can just bring this to an end, we will be able to see, and the results are...
We could have asked people not to vote 3.
Well, they certainly haven't voted 5, which is strongly agree, with the statement consumers aren't suitable for environmental conditions, 5 being strongly agree. So no, they don't think they're suitable. So here's a result, if you want to take a look.
So no one has strongly disagreed. Percentage for 40% for 4.
Yeah.
On a scale of 5.
Yeah, I think there's a general agreement there, isn't there?
They're not completely dissing them, but generally speaking, no is the answer.
Yeah, 4's certainly the largest category anyway. So,
nobody likes to go out on a limb with either 1 or 5, I guess.
They're British after all. You don't want to be.
Well, of course, we got that from the questions. But thank you to Tristan for your questions, and also to you, to John. But Tristan wins it. And that concludes today's computing webinar, the business rugged sweet spot, choosing fit for purpose, robust mobile devices and service models, kindly sponsored by Conker. If you want to find out more about Conker's British produced rugged tablets, smartphones and barcode scanners, check out www.weareconker.com. And to stay up to date with the latest tech news, features, CIO interviews and events, log on regularly to www.computing.co.uk. Finally, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for tuning in and for your questions, and our expert panellists, of course, who I hope have helped you choose fit for purpose, robust mobile devices and service models.